So I'm actually only going to take maybe like 30 minutes more to cover the rest of the WHM stuff that we didn't get into. I do want to get into a little bit more on the reporting side for WHM, because there's a lot of tools in there. We can look at some of them. But some of the reports and some of the data that you can extract out of WHM will really give you an idea of what's happening on the server, similar to looking at the full list and Installatron and stuff like that. The first thing that I want to look at is kind of an interesting one. And that's bandwidth. Bandwidth, of course, is traffic to a website, input, output. And that can mean a lot of different things. And again, when we look at these, it's a little bit tricky because, like I said, with the reading tea leaves thing, a site could be getting a whole lot of traffic and it's not the legitimate kind. It's not an interesting website. Maybe they uploaded a big file and 10 people downloaded it. And it's a lot of traffic because it was a big file to begin with. However, in general, you can gauge and kind of get some idea of what's going on the server by it. If you've got very popular websites, they're going to be at the top of this list. And so this list is actually sortable by the amount of traffic being hit to your server, and it's broken down by which websites. So I can click, they do XFR, I don't know why, for transfer, I guess. But if you click the transfer column, it does the smallest, and then we switch it again. And now I can see my heavy hitters, the sites that the most people are visiting in terms of bandwidth, in terms of traffic going to those sites. So that's just a really interesting way to start saying what it might be some projects or just some popular websites on our server that I don't know about. It's never really going to be realistic to do something like Google Analytics across the entire server. It gets really sketchy really quickly because you'd have to put tracking code on every account in the footer of every piece of HTML. You know, it's just not realistic. And it's also, it is domain of one's own. And so, you know, there's a balance there to be had. But these are some ways at the server level that you can say, what stuff is getting a lot of traffic? Where can I go to kind of dig deeper? And maybe you find something like, oh man, look at that project. I mean, this got hit on Reddit or, you know, Google News or something, and we had no idea. So, and then reach out to those folks and talk to them. So great way to find sites that you can promote. You know, if you look through here and you can see there'll be a long tail for sure between like a small handful that may have a lot of traffic and then a long tail of people who don't get very much. It's also a legacy thing because think about it. The longer sites exist, the more they show up in search results. And so over time, you're going to have more sites start to take up more bandwidth. We don't limit your bandwidth in any way because it's, you know, bandwidth is cheap and easy. So it's not a problem in that regard, but you will over time, like, you know, right now, this one's using 2.7 or something. Over time, I can imagine these sites taking up more and more bandwidth just because they start to show up in more search results and it becomes more ephemeral and people hitting the site from other avenues versus when somebody's just starting up. Really, unless they're passing the link to a professor, nobody else really knows about them on the web for that, for very much until they're indexed. So that's one way that I like to really start to dig into what's available in there. And you can see this is just for March. I can go back to last month to February, January, so you can move around a little bit to get some sense of whether it was just a one-time hit of traffic or if there's a site that's regularly getting a lot of traffic. Now, as I said with the caveat to that, it can be a good thing, it could be a bad thing. I've had sites that had a ton of bandwidth and traffic and I'm like, oh cool, what's the website? It's just a generic WordPress blog. And then I looked into it and they didn't have any comment protection. And they had 20,000 spam comments on their website. All of the traffic was the Chinese putting spam comments into forms. So, you know, you may find that it's nothing really valuable, but it's a way to start to get some insight into that. Another way, and it's a useful tool in general to start to gauge who's using it in what ways, is just very simple, disk usage. How much space are these accounts using? Little amounts of space, large amounts of space. They can both tell a story. So, you know, if you have a lot of users using no space and they've also had accounts for a long time, maybe it's an opportunity for you to reach out to them and say, was this project not really valuable to you? Could we close out your account? You know, so if you're doing a little bit of house cleaning, the smaller end of the spectrum can be a good thing too. You know, we realize, all right, they've had their account for 2 years and they've never installed anything. Maybe they can give us feedback on is it just not working? Did they ever actually even use it? And then you can also say, do you want me to go ahead and close out your account? So that's one way to do it. The other way would obviously be people with a lot of disk space, maybe doing interesting things. So something to look at as well. If you go to the list accounts area in here, you'll have a column on disk usage, and you can sort by that. So you've got your quotas, and then you have disk used. And so if I click on that, similar thing, we'll start with the smallest, click it one more time, and then we'll find the people using the most. Now, most everyone in here has quotas except for Alan Levine. So he's the biggest up in here. So I can see people who are using large amounts of disk space. So you might find that faculty member that you said, hey, you can have 10 gigs of space, and he's using 8 of it. And you're like, all right, there's got to be some cool stuff in here. And so this is an area where you can start to dig a little deeper, and see what's going on in their account, log in, see what applications they've installed and what's going on without having to say, hey, doing any interesting stuff? We'd love to promote your work. You can kind of do some of that heavy lifting yourself. And then the conversation becomes more of like, hey, I noticed that you've got this great exhibit. We'd love to feature it on our website, that kind of thing. So these are all just kind of methods where this black box of a server becomes something that you start to understand that activity that's happening on there.
I'm going to try something you can actually automate. Thinking about sending emails to people who don't regularly use accounts.
Not currently, no. cPanel doesn't have any, cPanel and WHM don't have any functionality to take actions on something based on a statistic or something. They do have a pretty robust API though. So if a programmer had the gumption to do that, you can definitely pull all of these statistics and stuff remotely and then run commands against it to do things. So. In addition to enlist accounts, the domain tab here, again, it's funny how domain just becomes so many different things, especially even before this workshop, we're thinking of like, domains, and a faculty's domain is just sort of the space that they embody, right? Well, in this space, it's the main subdomain or top level domain that the hosting account is for. So when Jim signed up, he chose jimgroom.stateu.org. He could have created a subdomain. He could have created, omeka.jimgroom.stateu.org, and that would be not showing up here. So if we go to list subdomains, there's just a few that have been created by separate users here where they've added additional domains to their account. So that's one area where you might be like, is there any other interesting projects that they created with that? The other thing that you can find under list parked domains, and we actually don't allow it on this server, so there are none, but if you do allow it, it's kind of interesting. If somebody, an add-on or a parked domain would mean they registered the domain elsewhere and added it to their account for hosting. So a good example of this is, let's say I'm at Bryn Mawr, and I got my subdomain towens.sites.brynmawr.edu. That's a pretty long URL already. So, and then I might set up an Omeka archive, and it's omeka.timowens. It gets really long. But I'm doing this really cool project with students, and you'll get faculty like this who are like, it's great, but URL is just, we live in a Twitter world, right? So everything could be a little bit more condensed, maybe. And so they could go to Namecheap or Hover or Reclaim Hosting and register a top-level domain. They're like $15 a year. And they might get a .com or a .org or something like that. And then they can add that domain to their account as an add-on domain and map it to a WordPress instance or something like that. That's what those domains would show up in here. So it can be interesting if you're allowing that and you've publicized that. This is a quick way to see who has mapped top-level domains or any kind of domains into their accounts here. This is also useful for .edu addresses if your IT department allows it. So they can point a subdomain, in this case, like brynmawr.edu. You might say like, hey, if IT's cool with it, we've got a great project, and we'd love for it to live at this specific subdomain. And they can point DNS, which Lauren will be talking about later on after this. They can point the DNS address for that subdomain to our server, and then that URL can be hosted by your server, and that project can live at a .edu address. Any questions so far? I'm kind of jumping all around, but.
So I know that we have some folks who
Yeah.
But they're not showing up in parked domains. So I'm not sure the difference.
I thought that they would. I wonder, is add-on different? Okay. Where would those show up?
You could do convert add-on domain.
Is it under subdomains? So go under list subdomains. There's a column here for add-on or parked, and I wonder if they show up as an add-on domain there. So this is a weird cPanel terminology. A parked domain is an alias that sits right over top of your public_HTML folder. It's just sort of like if I buy, you know, a hosting account for timowens.com, and then I also bought the .net and the .org and the .biz and all these other domains, and I don't want to do anything with them other than I just kind of want them all to go to the same place, then I would park them. You know, you can park them, and I'm not running other software on them or doing anything else. And so under cPanel, it shows up, it's called aliases in the domains area. That's what a parked domain is. An add-on domain is when you add a domain and you want to run separate software from it, a different project or something like that. So it's just a different terminology, but it just means an additional domain within cPanel. And so I guess the parked area, I was wrong, doesn't show those add-on domains, but this area should, and you could sort by add-on or parked domains and just see the ones from there. A quirk with cPanel is if it's added as an add-on domain, a subdomain is created as well. So it will always show up in this area.
A good tool there too for add-on domains is convert. Tim showed me this, and this was useful for us, especially with our shared hosting. If you search on convert add-on, if someone has an add-on domain to their account, you can bust that out to its own account. So you can pull it out and make it its own account.
And actually, I guess realistically, this interface, even if you weren't converting them, it's only going to show add-on domains. So that's probably the best place to get a list of just add-on domains on the server, because these are the only ones that exist there. Our server doesn't have any on this one. But yeah, that's a great example. Like a faculty member creates an add-on domain for a project. Faculty member is leaving, but the project's got to live on. But they've got all their personal stuff in their cPanel too. It's a great way to extract out just that domain and the contents of it, the WordPress site or whatever, databases and all that, and turn it into its own cPanel account that you could then associate with a different user entirely.
You talk a little easy about how you create an add-on. I have a park domain for one of my accounts, which they bought through you.
Yeah.
They bought the URL and they just drop it there and manage it and everything. I would create an add-on. Why would you need to do?
So an add-on would be, let's say I have a different project. I haven't started it yet, but it all starts with the domain, right? So I buy the domain, and now I know I want to run Omeka on this. Well, I'm already running WordPress on my main site, so I'm not going to park this domain because this is going to be a different project entirely. So if you go to domains, add-on domains, and you add that top-level domain in there, it creates a folder for it, and now I can install software to it. It becomes a separate slice of my own cPanel account that can run completely different software, but it's all within my own cPanel hosting account. So you can.
cPanel with a little icon that says add-on. You click that, and it's like my main domain is say jimbroom.stateu.org. The add-on domain I want to add is, you know, ernieandbert.com. So I would put that in. Add ernieandbert.com, and that would be a domain on my account now that I can install software. So any domain they wanted to buy, as long as the name service will point at that behind hosting, would work.
And then, that seems here that the parked one is just it's also a subdomain, where the add-on would just be the domain.
Parked can be a top-level domain as well, but it can only park right on top of your main domain. So whatever's running on your domain, it's just going to mirror that. So, yeah.
They notice the difference in the URL? Or?
Depends on the software. So yeah, because WordPress is a little funky. WordPress stores actual URLs in their database. So if you park another URL, it's going to redirect them if they go to it. If you're just doing HTML, it can run on multiple domains. Best practice, I'll tell you honestly, is for you not to do that. And the reason for it is search engines are going to see that the same content's living in multiple domains and just be like, well, I don't know which one's the authoritative or whatever. Best practice is if you're going to host content, choose what you want the main domain to be, buy all those other domains and set them all to redirect. And WordPress does that automatically for that exact reason, I think, and probably for other reasons as well. But yeah, WordPress has sort of like their definitive URL. it's under the WordPress settings general. Like you'll see a site URL option there, and that's the one that people are going to go to. So if you park other domains on top of it, it's just people can go to that domain, but it'll redirect and their URL will show the authoritative URL for it. Yes? You do. That's right. Yes. Yeah, because once they've already signed up, they'll never see that sign up form again. So even if you have domain registrations integrated into your sign up process, at this point, they've already got a cPanel account, and we don't currently have a way for them to go back in and buy a domain again later. It's something. They wouldn't even need shared hosting. They just need the domain registration because they've got hosting with you, right? So they just buy the $15 domain. They can buy it from us. They can buy it from really anywhere. If they buy it from us, it's already sort of pointed at our servers because of the way our DNS works. If they buy it elsewhere, they have to point it to our servers. We have a good guide on it too, I'll mention, on our community. Our community is where we put a bunch of documentation. Our workshop site also has a documentation area, but a lot of the documentation here on the community is for end user stuff, whereas the workshop is more for the admin side, tutorials and things like that. So there's a good guide here written by a great person. It talks about how to both register the domain and add it into cPanel and all that information. So put that out.
I'll follow up with you later.
Sure.
Mine in cPanel, it shows up as an add-on domain.
Okay.
But it's not showing up for so
okay. Yeah, we can take a look. Yeah,
Take a look.
we can definitely take a look. Sure.
It works. So,
Yeah. Exactly. Scroll through various things. Another reporting thing that's kind of useful, we talked about how WHMCS stores all of the emails that got sent out from there, but it's just WHMCS. And if you allow email on your server, or you're just curious whether people are getting messages for things, a good support scenario, and we'll talk about many, would be like, yeah, I set up an Omeka site, but when people go to register, they're not getting the confirmation code in their email. And so it's like, how do you even troubleshoot that? So WHM has this area called mail delivery reports. And this is the server storing every transactional email. It doesn't actually store the contents of the emails, but it does tell you whether they went out, whether they bounced back, whether they got an error. Good example when you might get an error is if the server has been sending out a lot of spam or something on accident and it gets on a blacklist, or a higher ed IT department is running their own firewall, which never happens, and blocks legitimate email. And so this is a good way that we use from a support standpoint to say, did the email leave our server? Did it ever come back and get a bounce back or something? And so I can go in here, and you can filter based on stuff. You can search by the recipient. You can drill it down to a specific date. Now you'll notice it doesn't store a whole lot of days here. So this isn't something where someone can say, yeah, I was supposed to get an email back in January and it never came. Can you look that up for me? The server's not going to store that far back. But I can see yesterday, Sunday, that kind of thing. So I could go in here and I'll just go to 314 to 316. And I'm not going to do any searching, so it comes up with everything. So you can see in the last 2 days, the server has sent and received 105 types of email. And if I look in here, and I can see the kinds of things that are going through, who got the email, what the from address was, what the exact day and time was, whether or not it was accepted. So you can see these are all accepted. If you're getting a green arrow, or sorry, a green check mark, and it says accepted, it left the server. It never got bounced back. So that means it could be one of many things. If they didn't get it, it might have gone in their spam folder. That's still for WHM, it's like I sent the email. You know, I didn't get a bounce back. Everything's good to go. Whether it got filtered on the other end, which is often quite possible, is you're not going to be able to see that. That's something they would need to troubleshoot on their end. So checking spam mail and that kind of thing. But this allows you to see, in other cases, you might have a red X here and it might say, you know, denied by mail server, blacklist, blah, 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 go to X website to find out more information. And they'll say like your IP was known for spamming or whatever it might be. And they give you information on how to remove yourself from a blacklist. for example. So we do that a lot on shared hosting because a lot of notifications, a lot of mail gets out of there, and we monitor a lot of the public ones. But IT departments and schools are known for sort of managing their own blacklists, or other organizations might. And so it's constantly one of those things where they're like, you know, we have to look through the logs and see, is it getting out of our server without bouncing back? So this is a good way to troubleshoot that kind of information. And like I say, you can search by recipient. There's a lot of different things you can search by. The sender's domain, so if you just want to see it for a specific user. And there's also an area in cPanel called track delivery. So if you nail down to the specific user and go to track delivery, it's just going to show their stuff. So that can be useful as well if you don't need to see it on the server as a whole. I like to look at the server when I'm trying to track something that might not be for a specific user, but I know who the email should have gone to, you know, and that kind of information. Or I just want to see like how many emails are going out of our server in the last day or two or something like that to troubleshoot issues. I think I'm just going to scroll through here to see if there's anything else, but that is most of what I can imagine you all needing to use WHM for. Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm thinking about about usage over time.
Okay.
Are there ways to do that? It seems like we do all the just put up now.
Right.
Can we see sort of like how many signups per month, and is it growing? Do we have more?
Yeah. Unfortunately, no, not unless you're doing the logging in some sort of separate system. So you might set up a reminder like maybe once a month to go in and track some of that stuff. They did create their own, so Brigham Young University created their own sort of dashboard admin interface, and they're using the APIs to pull in information in real time. But I don't believe that they're actually storing it and doing stuff over time. cPanel and WHM have a very robust API to be able to programmatically read everything that you see here for the most part. And so you can ping it a server and say, you know, what are our disk usage totals over time and all this other kind of stuff, and get that information back. And then they're just sort of making fancy graphs out of it within their WordPress install. But I don't believe even they are recording it over time.
Actually, WHM was able to see at least sign up.
Yeah. Right, in one of their reports, right, yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of times I find that, you know, with some of that heavier reporting, it's really hard for a server to keep up with that, because you can imagine the kind of statistics involved, not in just knowing what the disk usage is now, but then recording it over time and keeping all of that data. So part of the reason, I guess, why if you change a quota, it doesn't automatically, you know, work for the user or something like that. Just it might be more server intensive.
But you're right, with WHMCS, you can track, okay, how many people signed up this semester? You just go to the date, sign up, see pretty clearly. Okay, we had 300 people or 50 people.
That kind of wraps up most of the tools that I can think of in WHM. Like I mentioned, there are things in there like rebooting the server, restarting Apache and MySQL and that kind of stuff. I would just say kind of leave that stuff to us, you know, or at least if you're interested in knowing more about when you might want to do that, we can get into some of that with the support scenarios. But there's a lot of opportunity to take everything down for all of your users. So we tread pretty lightly there with that. So. Are there any other questions related to WHM before we move on to the next section? Cool.